السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأصلي وأسلم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين. أما بعد. Last week we covered the topic of riba and why riba is haram and why it is considered a major sin. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a hadith he states that لعن الله, that may the curse of Allah be upon آكل الربا, the one who consumes usury, وموكله, and the one who pays it, وكاتبه, and the one who records it, وشاهديه, and its two witnesses, وقال هم سواء, they are all equal in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because riba is injustice and they are all taking part in that injustice. And also, although the details of riba are many and we cannot go into specifics, we said last week that the literal meaning of riba is excess, increase, growth, right? And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam states in a hadith, الذهب بالذهب والفضة بالفضة والبر بالبر, that gold for gold, silver for silver, wheat for wheat, والشعير بالشعير, barley for barley, والتمر بالتمر, date for date, والملح بالملح, and salt for salt, مثلا بمثل, سواء بسواء, يدا بيد, that when one is trading, it has to be equal amounts, same amounts, and the transfer or the trading should be done at the time of the contract, right? It should not be delayed, right? The handing over or the taking ownership should be done at the time of contracting and not delayed. And so in essence there are two types of riba. One is riba that is related to a debt, to a loan, right? That you increase, the person who is lending increases the expected amount due to what? Time, right? So passing of, let's say for example, if you pay in 1 month, this is how much you pay extra. If you pay in a year's time, you increase that. If you pay in 2 years' time, so on and so forth. Okay, so one riba is related to the loan and expecting excess or growth simply because time is passing. And we said what last week, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He speaks of riba in the Quran, He speaks of sadaqah. Why? Because the relationship between humans should be one, or especially between believers, should be one of what? Of what?
Of justice.
Huh? Justice, yes, but more importantly, no.
What's the question?
Kindness and supporting and helping one another, and not exploiting the need of others, right? So Allah Azza wa Jal says that in the case of giving a loan, if a person is not able to repay that loan, instead of increasing it many folds and exploiting their need, you are expected to do what? Give them time. And if you can waive the loan altogether, then you will be rewarded for that. Okay, so one type of riba is related to loan. And it's very clear from the hadith of Rasulullah, it is all a sin, whether you give riba or you take riba. The one who consumes it and the one who gives it. Right? Even if there is necessity, if you are giving riba, unless you have a necessity for which you have received you are exempt from the ruling, and you can only know that through a alim that assesses your specific situation, then Rasulullah says the curse of Allah is on that person. If the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is on that person, then that person will have no barakah, especially in their livelihood and in their rizq. Okay? The other is a riba relating to trade. That when you trade things, certain things have to be treated equally and they have to be taken into ownership at the time of contracting. I'll give you an example. Certain types of gold have a greater value than others, right? So a gold that is older will have more value, okay? But you cannot exchange gold for gold unless it is like for like, regardless of the quality, regardless of the market value of one and the other, right? A simpler example, Rasulullah mentioned dates or wheat. You have different qualities of dates, right? You have the produce of this year, and you have the produce of 10 years ago, which we get here in Ramadan. Right? There's dates from Medina. They just don't tell you that it was in Medina 5 years ago, and it's been in a freezer for the last 5 years. But the point is that there is different qualities. Yeah, you've got number one, premium quality, and then lower qualities. But because it is the same item, right? Jins. You have, when you are trading, you are not allowed to look at the value or the current value, but rather Islam says what? That if you are trading and exchanging something that is the same it has to be like for like.
Is there a reason for it, or is just the hukum?
Yeah. There is, obviously. There is a reason for every. The reason riba is haram is that you are exploiting. So you have a higher quality and the other person has a lower quality. That is exploitation, right? You are you do not have a reason for benefiting if you are exchanging the same thing. Yeah. It hasn't made sense. Okay. Ask Allah to inshallah grant you more understanding. But in essence, if we go away with this understanding, the one that is more common and the one that we can relate to is what? The riba that is connected to loans. Okay? And Rasulullah ﷺ curses what? And we said that something becomes a major sin when there is what? Warning of punishment, curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or His Messenger, or if there is a capital punishment for it in this world.
Sorry, if a loan is fixed, example, you pay car or you pay house, pay car for work, example, you take 15,000 or 20,000 in 3 years or 5 years, you give him, example, I buy car with 20,000, the bank will give me 20,000. Every in 5 years, I give it 25 fixed, don't up, don't down.
Even if it is fixed, doesn't matter.
Fixed is the same problem.
Yeah, you are paying more than you're taking.
Because we can, example for work, you pay car for working. You pay car with 15, the bank will give me 15,000. I give him 17 or 18,000 in 3 years.
Not permissible.
No. So some people is really fixed the
No. So the brother is saying that if the interest rate is fixed, right, or whatever you are going to pay extra is fixed, then it is permissible. It's only unpermissible when it is unknown, and that is not true. Any excess on the amount that you have taken as a loan that you have to pay, other than what they call what are these transaction charges. Okay, transaction charges have been sort of qualified as permissible because there is somebody who's dealing with whatever your loan and what have you. But those are small amounts, £25, £50, whatever the charge is, that is permissible to pay. Anything other than that, any excess is not permissible, whether it is fixed or not fixed.
Islamic bank, you do like this, example, pay a house.
I don't want to get into that because
just I'm asking, you have to make sure.
Yeah.
No. Islamic bank, we pay house.
Not all Islamic banks. They all have different models, and you have to look at each model and how it operates and who are the scholars that have permitted it.
Beside me, he pay house. I like this house. The bank he paid, example in 20,000. He gives the house for me with 30,000 in 10 years, fixed. That's what the Islamic bank do.
Allahu alam.
That's why they hear. Like,
I'm not here to give a fatwa, right? And that is why you can only determine whether something is halal or haram if you look at the actual contract. If you do not have a contract, you do not know, right? So people generally come and say, oh, Imam, can you take this mortgage, that mortgage, Islamic mortgage, what have you? You do not know unless you look at the specific contract. If the specific contract is not before you, then you cannot make a judgment on the transaction, whether it is halal, permissible, permissible or not.
He fixed the loan, so we can't do it.
No.
He's not
No, but we'll talk about it later if you want. Okay. The last thing was what we addressed is that we said that riba is haram. Obviously, it is a major sin, and there are multiple warnings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran. And right at the end, last week we mentioned that there was certain statements of ulama and even the Sahaba radiallahu anhu ajma'in, for example Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, that if you have taken a loan from someone, then that person, or if you have given a loan to someone, then there should be no gifts given. Some have gone to the extent of saying you can't even eat with that person, right? And someone, a person who was listening to the talk, raised the question and sort of said, well, there's a difference of opinion about this. And when we said it, we did not say it to establish a ruling, but rather to show the warning and how particular Sahaba and the Salihin were in relation to excess when it came to dealing with financial dealings with one another, right? So in general, although there is a difference of opinion, in general, the person who's gifting and the person who's receiving a gift, it all depends on their intention, right? So if let's say for example, if I take a loan from my brother, right? My brother lends me £5,000. Now this is my brother, I'm accustomed to go to his house and eat food, and Eid he will give me a present and maybe whatever. Then there is no question on this, right? Because you are dealing with each other as you were dealing before the loan. The problem is when it is done specifically because there is this financial transaction between the two of you, and the only one aware of this is what? The person who's taken the loan, the person who's giving the loan. Allah is aware of their intentions. Nobody else will know. And so what we take from this is you have to be careful that when you are a lender or a person who has taken a loan or a person who has given a loan, you need to be careful about any excess. Okay, you may be overlooking something that will be considered as riba. And for that reason, a person should always ask ulama. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Kabira number 13. Consuming the wealth of the orphan and doing him or her injustice. And so in Salatul Isha, we recited the beginning verses of Surah An-Nisa, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes into some detail about this subject matter, how Allah commands to maintain and look after the interest of the orphan. And in Sharia, the definition of an orphan is the child, meaning that this person has not reached the age of puberty, male or female, who has lost the father. Okay, this is important. It's different from linguistically. A person who loses a mother is also considered an orphan, in culture or custom or linguistically. But in Sharia, it is only the one who, the child who loses his father. Why? Because the primary responsibility of the father is protection and providing. And so this child does not have a protector and does not have one to provide for him. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning about and encouraging. So Islam encourages the maintenance and the looking after orphans, widows also for that matter. And there are many ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that we'll see one of them here. And it warns against what? Doing injustice to the orphan. Right? The same basis and the same principle as riba, that you are exploiting, but here you're not exploiting somebody who is capable of taking care of themselves, but rather somebody who has no protector and no provider. And so this is a bigger injustice, right? So injustice is haram, and there are different levels of it. And one of the worst kinds is consuming the wealth of the orphan. And generally, this does not happen, this is not done by a stranger. This is done by what? Those who are closest to the orphan. Family members, right? Uncles, aunties, cousins, and so on and so forth. And then it becomes even greater haram and a greater sin, because you are committing a major sin. Number one, you are consuming the wealth of the orphan and doing him injustice. And then on top of that, you are failing in your responsibility as Dhawul Arham, right? That you have a duty due to your blood relation with this orphan. So this is a grave sin regarding which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa, He says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ الْيَتَامَى ظُلْمًا. Verily those who consume the wealth of the orphans unjustly. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not generalize. This is specific. If you consume the wealth of the orphan unjustly, إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا. They are only consuming fire in their bellies. وَسَيَصْلَوْنَ سَعِيرًا. And their abode or their final destination will be a blazing fire. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا مَالَ الْيَتِيمِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ حَتَّى يَبْلُغَ أَشُدَّهُ. Do not deal with the wealth of the orphan except in the best manner until he reaches the age of puberty. And Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu states that Rasulullah said that يَبْعَثُ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ قَوْمًا مِنْ قُبُورِهِمْ. A group of people will be resurrected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of Qiyamah. تَخْرُجُ النَّارُ مِنْ بُطُونِهِمْ. Fire will be coming out from their bellies. So Rasulullah was asked, who are these people? So he stated, haven't you heard that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this in the Quran by saying, verily those who consume the wealth of the orphan unjustly, إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا. They are consuming fire, and their abode will be a blazing fire. And one of the ulama, rahmatullah alayhi, states that the person who consumes the wealth from this verse, in explaining this verse, the one who consumes the wealth of the orphan unjustly will be resurrected on the day of Qiyamah with flames of fire coming out of their mouth, their ears, their nose, and their eyes. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. And this is in order to dishonor him, right? To dishonor him for this sin. Just like we saw that the people who consume riba, what was the punishment on the day of Qiyamah? They will be resurrected with big bellies for having consumed the wealth of others unjustly. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, those who consume the wealth of the orphan unjustly, which means that there is permission to consume it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows for that if there is a need. And ulama state, كل يتيم فكل ولي ليتيم إذا كان فقيرا فأكل من ماله بالمعروف بقدر قيامه عليه في مصالحه فلا بأس عليه. That the person who is maintaining, who is looking after the orphan, if that person is poor, then they are permitted to consume from the wealth of the orphan. And generally the wealth of the orphan is what? Inheritance, right? They are permitted to consume. Why? Because they are rendering a service. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَنْ كَانَ غَنِيًّا فَلْيَسْتَعْفِفْ. This was in Surah Al-Isha. The person who is capable of fulfilling his needs without touching the wealth of the orphan, then again, he should not do it as a service in order to gain benefit from it, but rather should do it out of goodness, right? Because he is expecting reward with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَنْ كَانَ فَقِيرًا فَلْيَأْكُلْ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. And Allah has permitted the one who is looking after the orphan to take from the wealth of the orphan بالمعروف, according to need and in a way that is acceptable and that is not unjust. And there are different interpretations of this. The first one is that if a person is looking after the orphan and he hasn't the means, then he can take from the wealth of the orphan, but he will consider this to be a loan that he has to repay back. This is one example or one possibility. The other is that he is permitted to consume the wealth of the orphan only for the basic needs, right? And basic needs are what? Clothing, food, shelter, and a vehicle or something to transport. The third possibility or interpretation is that a person is allowed to take from the wealth of the orphan and as if he is employed or working for the orphan. Okay? So since he or she is looking after the orphan, they can take wages, if you like, from their inheritance or their wealth.
Also, looking after the orphan would mean that looking after the whole property.
Yes.
Of the orphan. So that will just
So yeah. So if you are, let's say for example, because Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says in a hadith that anybody who is responsible for the wealth of the orphan or the inheritance should not let it sit and be reduced by zakah, because every year you will have to pay zakat on it, and it will continue to reduce. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam encourages that wealth should be invested in a way that the orphan will benefit, and the person who's doing the investing can also take a share of the profit. Yeah. The fourth possibility is that to take in need with the intention to pay it back, but if one is not able to pay it back, then there is no responsibility. Who is to judge? Who will make the judgment? I'm looking after an orphan. That orphan is my nephew or my niece. They have no idea what is going on, and they have an inheritance of £1 million. Who is to determine what is acceptable, what is not acceptable? Do I do it myself? Two witnesses. There has to be witnesses to whatever. You cannot take of your own accord, right? There has to be witnesses. And those people will tell you so you explain your financial situation to them, and they will make a judgment on whether, and they have to be Muslim, and obviously they have to be aware of Sharia and what is considered as basic needs in Sharia. Okay, and they will judge whether what you are consuming and what you are taking and the arrangement that you are making is reasonable or not. Okay, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hints to this because He says, وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغُوا النِّكَاحِ. Look after the orphans, maintain the orphans until they reach the age of marriage. Okay, the time of marriage. فَإِنْ آنَسْتُم مِّنْهُمْ رُشْدًا فَادْفَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ أَمْوَالَهُم. When they reach this age, if you think that they are capable of looking after their own interests, then hand over their wealth to them. ومن كان غنيا فليستعفف ومن كان فقيرا فليأكل منه فإذا دفعتم إليهم أموالهم فأشهدوا عليهم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that make sure there are witnesses when you are handing over the wealth to the yatim, who is no longer an orphan, by the way, because once he passes the age of puberty, that he or she is no longer considered an orphan. But when you are doing the handover, you have to have witnesses. And witnesses should be informed of how much what? They have to be informed, and things have to be explained. How much wealth there was initially, right? In inheritance or that belonged to the orphan, how much of it was spent in zakah, how much of it was spent looking after and maintaining the orphan, and what is left, right? And that has to be done with witnesses present. Then Imam Dhabi rahmatullah alayhi mentions or brings a hadith of Imam Bukhari rahmatullah alayhi that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Ana wa kafilu al-yatim fil jannati hakadha wa ashara bis sababati wal wusta." That I and the one who looks after the orphan will be in paradise like so. And he points out with his two fingers that one will be close to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam if they fulfill this duty to the best of their ability. And there are many different benefits. One of them, looking after the orphan. And it is relatively easy in this day and age. You have institutions that look after the orphans, and all that is expected of you is to do what? To give financial aid, right? Whether that is to look after their basic needs or whether to pay for their education, so on and so forth. So one is that a person who looks after the yatim will be in paradise with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Even your brother. Or your
Yes,
sister.
yeah. Even if it is your brother or your sister, absolutely. Actually, even more so if it is your brother, like younger siblings, and you look after them. And actually, the hadith after, and we'll mention it, كافل اليتيم له ولغيره أنا وهو كهاتين في الجنة. So Rasulullah in this other narration, he says, the one who looks after the orphan, له أو لغيره, whether that orphan is related to him or not. The orphan can, like the brother said, can be your niece, your nephew, your brother, your sister, right? Can be an orphan, and you are looking after them because they are related to you, a cousin, or a stranger completely, somebody you are not related to. The reward is the same. So this is one. In another hadith, Rasulullah says that the person who wipes over the head of an orphan, it is a very small very small gesture from yourself. Wiping over the head of an orphan, what does it take? Rasulullah says that a person will be rewarded for every hair that is touched by the person's hand. Another one, hadith, a person came complaining to Rasulullah of hardness of his heart. Ya Rasulullah, I find that my heart is very hard, meaning that when I hear Quran and think of death and all of this, I don't feel any, so my heart does not soften, very harsh and hard. So Rasulullah said to him, look after an orphan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will place mercy in your heart. So looking after the orphan entails a number of things. Number one is looking after them physically, their food, clothing, shelter. This is one. Second is to educate them, to educate the orphan, whether that is formal education or whether that is moral education, right? Teaching them moral values. So this is the second responsibility. The third is to look after their wealth or whatever is in their belonging. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Kahf mentions that Musa alayhi salam with Al-Khidr, the third question that Musa alayhi salam asked was in relation to the war. Right? Khidr and Musa alayhi salam were traveling, and they came across a town. They asked to be their guests and to be fed, and the people of that town refused. And as they're passing through that town, Khidr alayhi salam sees a wall that is falling. So he does what? He rebuilds it, right, and strengthens it. So Musa alayhi salam said, look, you are doing them a service and yet they are not willing to accept us as guests or give us any food. You should have taken something in return for your work and your service. So he said, وَأَمَّا الْجِدَارُ فَكَانَ لِغُلَامَيْنِ يَتِيمَيْنِ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ. That wall that you are questioning about, it belonged to two orphan children in that town or in that city. وَكَانَ تَحْتَهُ كَنْزٌ لَهُمَا. And under it was a treasure, meaning inheritance that was left. وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. And their father, or Mufassirin said their forefather was somebody righteous. فَأَرَادَ رَبُّكَ أَنْ يَبْلُغَا أَشُدَّهُمَا وَيَسْتَخْرِجَا كَنْزَهُمَا. So your Lord intended or wanted for them to reach the age of puberty and that their wealth remains safe until then, because if the wall had fallen, then people will come across it, and from the fact that they did not invite Musa alayhi salam and Khidr alayhi salam as guests, it shows that they were not very good people. Rahmatan min Rabbik, that this was a mercy from your Lord. Right, so we said that when Rasulullah ﷺ or the Quran talks about maintaining the orphan or looking after the orphan, it has different aspects. One of them is to look after their physical needs, clothing, food and shelter, to educate them, whether that is education, worldly education or dini education, or education in moral values, and thirdly, to look after their wealth. In another hadith, Rasulullah ﷺ said, "Man damma yatiman min al-muslimina ila ta'amihi wa sharabih." That the one who joins an orphan from the Muslims to his food and clothing and drink, حتى يغنيه الله تعالى, until that orphan becomes independent through the will of Allah Azza wa Jal, أوجب الله له الجنة. Paradise will become compulsory for that person. إلا أن يعمل ذنبا لا يغفر, except if that person commits a sin that is not forgiven, for example shirk. So this hadith is more specific than the previous one, because here this person is taking the orphan into his home, right? Because sharing food and drink is what is taking the orphan into your home, and the orphan living with you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى. That Sahaba radiallahu anhum said, Ya Rasulullah, we take care of the orphan. Now we are not financially in a position to feed them. So for that reason, we bring them into our home. We are spending from their wealth, but we are all eating in one. It's difficult to sort of cook separate food for the orphan from his wealth, and then make your own meal for the family, and so on and so forth. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى. So Allah mentions it in Surah Al-Baqarah. قُلْ إِصْلَاحٌ. And this happened, and there is a lot of these verses were revealed especially after the battle of Uhud. Right? Badr also, but Uhud was more important because there were a number of Sahaba, 70 odd Sahaba who were martyred, right? So it was a new sort of phenomenon in Medina, in the sense that now there will be widows and orphans. And Rasulullah ﷺ led by example. One of the Sahaba who was a child at the time, he was when the Rasulullah ﷺ and Sahaba were returning from Uhud, this child was looking for his father, and his father had been martyred. I forget the name. But as Rasulullah ﷺ was, when he saw the child, and he saw that the child was looking for his father, Rasulullah ﷺ asked him, he said, Ya Rasulullah, I'm looking for my father. So Rasulullah ﷺ responded, would you like Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to be your father, and Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha to be your mother? So yeah.
Two questions. One, you're talking about looking after orphans, but orphans and widows go hand in hand. So the best sort of support would be that the orphan stays with his mother or her mother, and then you support them. Right? That's one thing. And the other is also regarding their property, to handing it back to them. If I believe if the person lacks mental capacity to look after it, then you are supposed to continue to look after it.
Okay, so looking after the orphan at times is looking after his interest, even though he is living with his mother, who is a widow. But in general, the mother will not be able to take care of all the responsibilities of that child, right? And this is where family members or well-wishers will step in and look after some aspects of the child. And actually, having said that, the reward of looking after the orphan is also given to the mother, right? And there is a specific hadith about the woman who does not marry after her husband dies, in order to look after her orphan child or children, that this woman has a high degree in paradise. Something along the lines that Rasulullah said, that I will be the first one to enter paradise, except that there will be a woman very close to me, and that is the woman who, or this is a category of women who sacrificed their own need of companionship for the sake of looking after their orphan children. But even if the mother is alive, it does not automatically entail that that child cannot be, the looking after or the responsibility of the child cannot be transferred to somebody else, and that child being with somebody else. And the second question was, and actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَابْتَلُوا الْيَتَامَى حَتَّى إِذَا فَإِنْ آنَسْتُم مِّنْهُمْ رُشْدًا, that you only hand over the wealth of the orphan to him when he reaches the age of adulthood, if he has the mental ability of looking after his own interests, right? If he is not capable of looking after his own interests, then you will continue until such time comes, right? You will continue on. So as an example, generally the age of puberty is about 15 in Sharia. Now at the age of 15, in our day and age, children, we can still call them children, teenagers are not capable of looking after their own interests. So you will continue until they reach an age where you feel that they have anastum minhum rushdahum, meaning they have the intelligence and the mental capacity to know what is good for them and what is bad for them, and they will not squander the wealth, right? That is when you will hand over their wealth to them. Another narration, that Abu Darda radiallahu anhu was asked by a person. He said, can you advise me? So Abu Darda radiallahu anhu said, irhamil yatim, have mercy on the orphan. And although we said that certain verses specifically were revealed after the battle of Uhud, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enjoined looking after and caring for the orphan in Mecca, in the early stages of revelation, in Surah Al-Duha, right? فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that do not treat the orphan in an ill manner. And also he says, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمِ. Have you seen the one who disbelieves in the day of judgment? فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمِ, the one who pushes away or harms the orphan. So there is revelation about it even before the coming of Rasulullah to Medina. Anyway, so Abu Darda, in giving advice, he said, have mercy on the orphan, وَادْنُهُ مِنْكَ, and bring him close to you. وَأَطْعِمْهُ مِنْ طَعَامِكَ, and feed him from your food. فَإِنِّي سَمِعْتُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ وَأَتَاهُ رَجُلٌ يَشْتَكِي قَسْوَةَ قَلْبِهِ. I have heard a man who came complaining to Rasulullah ﷺ of the hardness of his heart. So Rasulullah ﷺ stated, if you want your heart to soften, فَدْنُ الْيَتِيمَ مِنْكَ, bring the orphan close to you, وَامْسَحْ رَأْسَهُ, and wipe over his head, وَأَطْعِمْهُ مِنْ طَعَامِكَ, and feed him from your food, فَإِنَّ ذَلِكَ يُلِينُ قَلْبَكَ, for that will soften your heart. And then Imam Al-Dhahabi rahmatullah alayhi mentions the story of one of the righteous salihin from the past, from the Salaf. He says that this person says that I was involved in many sins before coming to guidance, right? What we call in the time of Jahiliyyah. People say in my time of Jahiliyyah, and that is not personally I do not think that is appropriate. The time of Jahiliyyah was before revelation, right? When we sin, we are aware of what we are doing, right? It can only be called Jahiliyyah if a person does not know. Okay, if the person is, they're Muslim but they're ignorant of what is halal, what is haram, what is obligation, what is then you can say this is Jahiliyyah. Anyway, so this person says that I was sinning a great deal, and some of the sins he mentions is drinking of alcohol. But he says one day I came across an orphan child. So I took him with me and I took care of him. I fed him, clothed him, bathed him, and I was kind to him, like a person would show kindness to his or her own child. And he says, that night, in my sleep, I saw that, in a dream, I saw that Qiyamah had come, and that I was called for rendering accounts, for my accounting and judgment before Allah. And an order was given for me to be taken to hellfire, and I was pulled away by the Zabaniyah, the angels in charge of hellfire. And suddenly, as I am being dragged to hellfire by the angels, this orphan appeared. He appeared and he blocked the way, and he said that leave him, allow him to go, so that I can intercede in his favor before my Lord for his kindness to me. So the angels responded to the orphan. They said in the dream that we have not been commanded to do this. We have been asked to take him to hellfire. And then he says, I heard a call, meaning a call from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I have forgiven him and I have allowed him entry into paradise due to the intercession of this orphan. And actually, looking after the orphan is a sadaqah jariyah. It is a sadaqah jariyah, because you are caring, and that child will then grow up and live life, and you will continue to benefit from the reward for as long as that child or that person remains alive. And he said, due to this dream, when I woke up, I repented. And realizing that I was saved in my dream due to the intercession of the orphan, I spend much of my time looking after the orphans and maintaining them and looking after their interest. Also, a statement of Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu. Anas ibn Malik, who was he was what? What was he? A servant of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from a young age. He says, I spent 10 years with Rasulullah, serving Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, خير البيوت بيت فيه يتيم يحسن إليه. The best of houses, meaning best of Muslim homes, or the best of homes, are the homes where there is an orphan child that is being treated with kindness. وشر البيوت بيت فيه يتيم يساء إليه. And the worst of homes is the home where there is an orphan living and he is being treated in a bad way. وأحب عباد الله إلى الله من اصطنع صنعا إلى يتيم أو أرملة. And the most beloved servants to Allah are those who show kindness to the orphan and to Armala is a widow. And then he brings another hadith, another story, just as a maw'idha or to take a lesson from. He says that a person who was from the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, known as Alawi, right? Alawi, somebody that is from the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, had traveled to a land where a non-Muslim land with his family. So a man from the progeny of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam traveled with his family to a non-Muslim land. And in that non-Muslim land, there were Muslims living and non-Muslims. You know, like you had in the past, you had Muslim land, non-Muslim land, and then, you know, the border in between, you will have, you know, cities or areas where Muslims and non-Muslims are living. Anyway, this person travels with his family for trade, and he dies. So the woman is left widow with orphans, and so she goes to the masjid. And she asks people, and she says, look, I am somebody from the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I am in this predicament or in this situation. Can you point out somebody to help? So they've said one of two people will help you. One of them was she was okay. So she was told that you can go to one of two people. One is Shaykh al-Balad, meaning a person of authority in that area, and that this was a Muslim person. Or you can go to another man who is wealthy and perhaps can help you and take care of you, and this is a Majusi. Majusi is a fire worshipper. So she goes to the Muslim person, and she says, you know, this is my situation. I was traveling with my husband. My husband has died. I'm looking after these orphans. I don't have shelter. I'm far away from my home. It is cold, and I don't have anything to fulfill the basic needs of my child. And then she mentions, and she says, I am from the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, Sharifa. So this Muslim person says, he says, what is your evidence for being from the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? We do this sometimes, right? What is the evidence? He said, what is the, you know, who can vouch for you that you are from the family? He forgot about this is a Muslim lady who is who is a widow and has orphan children with her, and she's far away from her home. So all of these reasons to look after her, that she is a widow, number one, that she has orphans, number two, she's in a state of poverty, number three, and on top of that, she's away from her home. Even if she was wealthy, being away from your home entitles you to zakah and being looked after. Anyway, he says, what is, anybody can vouch for you, any evidence? So she says, I have nothing. He says, oh, go away. And so she goes from him to the fire worshipper, the Majusi. And she comes to him and says, knocks on his door and says, this is my situation, and people have pointed you out to me that you may be able to help. So he received her with kindness, and he brought her into his, her and her children into his home, and fed them and looked after them. And so nighttime comes, and in his dream, the man who pushed this woman away, he saw in his dream that Qiyamah had started. And that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was present. And he saw a large palace made from, built from pearls and rubies. And he asked Rasulullah ﷺ in his dream, he said, Ya Rasulullah, who is this palace for? So Rasulullah ﷺ said, this palace is for a Muslim person. So he said, Ya Rasulullah, I am Muslim. He said, where is your evidence? Where is your evidence for being Muslim? So this person realizes, the mistake. And clearly it shows that this person was not somebody bad, because you don't get to see Rasulullah ﷺ unless you have some righteousness, right? Anyway, so he realizes his mistake, that I shouldn't have treated this woman in this way and questioned her. So Rasulullah said, bring me proof that you are Muslim. So he was in a state of shock. So Rasulullah said to him that when this poor woman came to you, this is your treatment of her. So when he woke up in the morning, he went looking for this woman, and he was told that she was taken in by this Majusi man. So he goes to his door, knocks on his door, and he says, I have come looking for this woman. Can you hand her over to me? So the Majusi man says, the person says no. He says, look, I'll give you whatever you want. And he offers him a substantial amount of money. Alfu dinar. Alfu dinar is 1,000 gold coins. So the man refuses, and he says, the palace that you saw yesterday in your dream, I saw myself. And he said that actually when this woman came into our home, she gave us da'wah, myself and my wife, my family, invited us to Islam, so we accepted Islam. And the reason for it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted them iman for looking after what? Somebody who is in that situation. So he said that I did not go to bed except after accepting the invitation to Islam by this blessed lady, and I have seen in my dream what you saw. And that when I saw this, I asked Rasulullah ﷺ and said, Ya Rasulullah, who is this palace for? He said, it is for a person who is Muslim. And then Rasulullah ﷺ asked me, he said, is this woman in your care? So I responded, yes, Ya Rasulullah. So Rasulullah ﷺ said that this palace will be, inshallah, for you and your family members, and that you will enter paradise through the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and because of the iman and the belief that you have brought. So this shows it's a story to show the importance of of looking after the orphan and the widow. And then a last hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in Sahihain, he says, "As-sa'i ala al-armalati wal-miskin." As-sa'i is a person who is working, right? Who's making an effort in order to look after the interest of the widow and somebody who is poor. كالمجاهد في سبيل الله. That person is given the reward of the one who is fighting in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because what is the purpose of jihad fi sabilillah? To establish what? Justice. And this person who is looking after an orphan, or looking after a widow, or looking after a poor person, they are doing what? They are establishing justice on earth. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made some in need, and others He has given them in order to test them. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if He had wanted, everybody would be made wealthy. And also, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted, He would make us all vulnerable and in need. Right? And this is actually mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah, where we said, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْيَتَامَى, they ask you they question you in relation to the orphans. قُلْ إِصْلَاحٌ لَهُمْ خَيْرٌ. Say kindness to them and be good to them is what? Is a means of khair, blessing and benefit. وَإِن تُخَالِطُوهُمْ فَإِخْوَانُكُمْ. And if you include them, and this was the questioning of Sahaba, we said that they said, Ya Rasulullah, we have the wealth of the orphan and we have to spend from it, but we are eating together. And so Allah said, do as is whatever is convenient for you, do it. And Allah knows, Wallahu ya'lamu al-mufsida min al-muslih. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows those who have good intention in their dealing in the wealth of the orphan, and those who have bad intention. And then he says, وَلَوْ شَاءَ اللَّهُ لَأَعْنَتَكُمْ. And remember, if Allah willed, He would have made you as vulnerable as that orphan child that you are looking after. وَكَالْقَائِمِ لَا يَفْتُرُ. And also the narrator of the hadith, he says that Rasulullah said, the person who makes an effort to fulfill the needs of the widow and the needy is like the mujahid in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and is like the person who stands in prayer without fatigue, and the one who fasts continuously without breaking his fast. Meaning there is great reward if you have one person who's looking after the welfare of those who are poor and needy and destitute and in vulnerable situation, and on the other side you have somebody who's always worshipping Allah, praying salah and fasting, then the reward is the same and equal. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of this has to obviously be done seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah azza wa jal to grant us more understanding, to enable us to gain these virtues and these rewards through actions, and to protect us from the major sin of consuming the wealth of the orphan and doing them unjustly and doing them injustice and harming them. Any questions? 9:20.
Considering the looking after the orphan and the widow, is, let's say, marrying the widow and to give the support for the father or the child, would that be?
Yes, if a man marries a widow and looks after those children, then he will be rewarded because they are not his children, and that is actually a good intention to have, and a person will be rewarded and he will be considered as maintaining or looking after the orphan. Yeah. Because in Sharia, when a man marries a widow, he does not have a responsibility to her children. The man has a responsibility to his wife, but there is no, responsibility. Sharia does not dictate that a person has to look after. So if he does it, he is doing it out of the goodness of his heart. Just like when we say, when a man and a woman live, let's say for example, with their in-laws, it is not the responsibility of the wife to serve the in-laws, but if she does, she is rewarded for it. Right? Islam does not impose that on a woman or on the man. If the man is living with his in-laws, he doesn't have a responsibility to. Right? Because we said they are not arham, right? They are not blood relations, so there is no direct responsibility. Okay, subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la